Before I begin, I'd like to say that I changed the topic of this service because I gave a sermon on forgiveness this time last year, and I thought, how many times do you need to be reminded to forgive each other? Probably every day, but I decided not to be redundant. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Thus reads the beginning of one of the proscriptions in the Hebrew scriptures commonly called the Ten Commandments. Yom Kippur begins at sundown tonight and ends at sundown tomorrow. Yom Kippur is the holiest day in Judaism. It is a time full of fasting, long prayer services in synagogues, as well as confessions of sin. Yom Kippur is sacred time spent on serious spiritual exercises. Tradition holds that God seals each individual's future fate in the book of life on Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is considered in the reading from Leviticus today a Shabbat, a Sabbath. The Sabbath. If you are like me, it sounds like something out of a Puritan times. It seems a restriction. In this country, or at least the southern part of it, when I was growing up, the idea of Sabbath held legal restriction. One could not buy alcohol or groceries or clothes or almost anything else on Sunday, the Christian Sabbath, when I was a child. I can remember the people in the small southern town where I went to high school whispering to each other that so-and-so mowed his lawn on Sunday. It was tantamount to atheism or membership in the ACLU, whichever was worse. When I was a child, I was told that I might play on Sunday, but I had to play quietly. I thought the adults around me really believed that God would strike us down if we made too much noise on a Sunday. God-fearing people in Georgia did not do yard work on the Christian Sabbath, nor do they play profane games with cards or dice. That was what keeping the Sabbath meant to me as a child. It meant a time of some social repression and perhaps some small degree of fear as well. This interpretation of the Sabbath is totally unlike the modern Jewish concept of the Shabbat, the Sabbath. Today we shall reflect on the spirit of the Jewish concept of Shabbat and its possible meaning for our individual lives and our lives in community. What does Shabbat, the Sabbath, really mean? It does not mean the obligatory repressiveness of religious culture. Though it does for some people in the Jewish community, that's probably true. But for those who are on the more modern side of the faith, it is a time, a holy time, that is given to connect with the source of the Spirit, time that is meant for connection with each other, time that is intentionally given for all that is good in life. Shabbat is also the time meant for reflection and synthesis. It is a time for making sense of everything that has happened the other 6 days of the week. Time for bringing together our feelings. Time to sort out that which is really pulling at our lives. Unlike the puritanical, conservative Christian rules of Sabbath day that I grew up with in the Deep South, the Jewish idea of Sabbath is not a time of restriction or of repression. It is supposed to be a time of joy. As Rabbi Heschel writes in his book about Shabbat, the Sabbath is not dedicated exclusively to spiritual goals. It is a day of the soul as well as of the body. Comfort and pleasure are an integral part of the Sabbath observance. Everyone in his or her entirety, all the faculties must share its blessing. As I was studying the idea of Shabbat, I found that it was a social innovation that changed the ancient world. Why would that be such a radical idea? When the Romans met the Jews and noticed their adherence to restraining from labor on the Sabbath, the Roman response was that of contempt. The Sabbath was a sign of Jewish indolence, according to Seneca, Juvenal, and other Roman writers. When Christianity spread through the Mediterranean world, it still retained some of its original Jewish flavor. The early Christians believed in Shabbat. Though they began to change the nature of worship and invented new rituals and had a different theology, they still felt that there was a need for one day off a week just to be spiritual. Why was that so significant? The people in the ancient Mediterranean world, before the advent of Christianity, took off days from labor did not take days off. There was never a day off. As I learned about the Sabbath, I realized that its adoption meant that people who worked 7 days a week would have one day off. Even slaves and animals had the day off. Slaves in Christian Rome had the Sabbath off and had worked previously for 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year. The interpretation of the Sabbath in Christian context meant that even beasts of burden were permitted to rest and graze 1 day out of 7. They had the day off. If you're a cow, this is great. The idea of the Sabbath must have been very popular in ancient Rome, especially with the working classes. I suspect that as many people were converted to Christianity by the thought of a day off as they were by Christian theology and Christian ethics. Time off had to be a great marketing ploy for the new faith. Maybe we Unitarian Universalists should go for a third day off, a 3-day weekend. We may have a lot of converts if we all converted. For us in our time, though, we need the concept of the Sabbath as much as the ancient people did. Shabbat is not just a day reserved for worship. It is, as has been practiced in our culture, it was given as a time for earnest reflection and for play, a time to connect with each other. Shabbat is a time to renew one's soul, a time to refrain from working in order just to be with the universe. Shabbat is a time of connection with God and with each other. A few years ago, I saw a program on PBS that illustrated for me the connection of Shabbat. I think it was called Prairie House. PBS had a series of about people from our modern times living in a setting that was the way people lived 100 years or more ago. And these people were in a reality show in which people from our time were placed in a sod house on the prairie and asked to live like the original settlers of the region lived. They were not permitted to use modern tools or modern conveniences. That's a very tough reality show. One of the families featured in the Prairie House were a rich couple and their 7 to 10-year-old son. As the program began, we saw how this couple lived. They had a huge mansion in the suburbs. It was so big that a significant amount of family talk occurred on the house's intercom system. That is, they talked on the intercom when they were home because they were so far apart. This is obviously before cell phones were common. The parents were busy working hard to afford this ostentatious lifestyle, and they rarely had time to spend with each other or with their son. Like everyone else in the program, this family had a rough time adjusting to living in a dirty, one-room home. At the end of the program, the people who took part were asked to reflect on their experience after they had returned to their modern lives. Most of them complained about the hardship, except for one. The boy who lived in the mansion had an interesting reflection. He did not enjoy returning to his modern convenient mansion in the suburbs. He wished they were still living in that sod house on the prairie. Why wish that? He wished that because when he was in that sod house, he was with his parents all the time. He was growing up in this huge house surrounded by toys and many luxuries. Yet, what that boy really wanted, most of all, was to be with his parents. Sharing space with them for weeks was paradise to him. They were not called away on cell phones for business or something like that. They did not rush out to spend many hours every day on work or shopping or anything else. For that time in the Prairie House, his family was together, and that was all that boy wanted. I think that the boy on Prairie House understood the concept of Shabbat. He understood the need to take time off to reconnect with loved ones. I think that he would have understood the need to savor a moment with the universe just by being with each other. Many people need Shabbat. For those in a certain age range, the need for Shabbat is even greater. You see this in the need in those who are between 30 and 60 years of age, most especially. They are often caught somewhere in between taking care of children and taking care of parents, running from soccer practice to their parents' homes. Their days off are as busy as their days on. They spend most of their weekends running errands and trying to relax for a few hours that rarely come. I imagine they argue on the weekends because they want the homes they live in now to be as neat and clean as the ones they grew up in. I imagine that this generation experiences the frustration of mixed expectations and roles more than any for many centuries. As I have ministered to people in that age group, I have become aware of the need for a true Shabbat in many people's lives. I have observed the only readings that seem to speak to where many people were actually spoke about living stressful, harried, fast lives. Give a meditation about slowing down or missing out because of the pace of their lives. Get a reading about feeling pulled in many directions, and they were listening. They were there. The other thing about this age group is that it tends to overschedule its children with one vital activity after another. Childhood needs to be a time of imagination and pretending, a time to consider stories and play at being an adult. This tends to happen when someone is free from appointments, when one has Shabbat. I do not know all the things that could heal a person's soul. Certainly the pressures that any one of us experiences is unique. Yet I know of one thing in all the world that makes sense: Shabbat. For many people, going to church is only one part of a very busy day. I hope this time will help you. I am grateful for your commitment. The idea of Shabbat, though, goes further than an hour or two. It's the entire 24-hour period. No, that does not mean that the Sunday service should be significantly extended. Nor does it mean that we should impose legal restrictions upon commerce and transportation on the Sabbath. Rather, the idea of Shabbat is not only about connecting with our values or our God. It is about connecting with the people who remind us of the creative, inspiring nature of this world. It's about connecting with this earth as well, so that a walk in the woods is also that needed moment of reflection, prayer, a time when one is out of oneself and alive to the world. Sometimes we need to take this concept of Shabbat and extend it. So it is no surprise that the word sabbatical is derived from Shabbat, or Sabbath. A sabbatical is a time for reflection, for re-energizing, for reconnecting differently to the world. That means taking time off from a voluntary position or taking time off from cleaning house. Where is it written that your home has to be vacuumed several times a week? It might even mean taking time away from a relationship to reflect upon something other than what is present. In the midst of this, though, lies the possibility that sometimes one needs to take a sabbatical. Stop doing and just be. As a Buddhist once told me, don't just do something, stand there. This seems abstract, but it did happen to one of my colleagues in the ministry when she was a layperson of a Unitarian Universalist church. This I'm talking about Louise Ulrich, who I've lit a candle for. She's alive, but her memory is gone. At the time, she was active in many committees. One year, she resigned her responsibilities and only sang in the choir. People in the church were concerned. Was she angry with someone? Was she wanting to leave? No, she told them. She just needed to take a sabbatical from the work of the church before she became angry or wanted to leave. She took a year off from major commitments and returned later energized and ready to jump into things again. Louise always wanted to be useful. Though that is about church life, it is also about anything. I have observed that those who are retired are as likely sometimes to be overextended as anyone else. Sometimes, if we can, we need to take the time to reconnect with our life. That is what Shabbat is like. It is a holy time given to our relationship with the universe, God, Goddess, mother, father, sister, brother, friends, children. Shabbat at its best is about taking the time to find that which inspires us, that which we love. When we spend that time with someone or that community, we are stronger and feel the pulse of the universe all the more. And for Unitarian Universalists, this is especially an important thing to say. Among all the religious bodies in the United States, the Unitarian Universalists always test highest on the measures of the Protestant work ethic, as the German sociologist Max Weber called it. Even though most of us do not identify Protestantism as our theological grounding, we tend to rate most highly with the Protestant work ethic. We are people who believe that there are no hands to accomplish the work of the world but our own. We place responsibility on each individual to develop his or her own theology. We are people who believe in individual rights and responsibilities. We are people who want to be useful, and we want to have our tasks ahead of us. Sometimes, though, paradoxically, the most important way to be useful is to be useless. At times, everyone needs to reconnect with the reason for existing. At times, everyone needs just to be rather than to do. In closing, let me share with you that I not share with you the Jewish spirit of Shabbat in some sort of self-help, lurid kind of way. The need for Sabbath is as important for me as it is for you. I have learned that if I do not take time just to be, that life is ultimately flat, mechanical. But with the spirit of Shabbat, I revere each person more fully, appreciate this life more completely. And isn't that an important aspect of human existence? May you find the spirit of Sabbath in your life. May you take out all that is unnecessary and replace it with all that is fulfilling. May your Shabbat be a blessing unto you and unto all the world. So be it. Blessed be. Amen.